Um, that way, if your question is something that other people are wondering, they can benefit from it. So tell me what you're wondering.
Uh, how much show and tell is too much show and tell?
I don't think there's a definitive answer to that. I think it's a feeling. And so
If you feel like it's too much, it probably is like that type of thing.
probably, I mean, I would trust your instincts, but tell me a little bit like when you're reading something, how much is too much for you?
I mean, if you have a whole paragraph full of showings, I mean, I get the description, but it can get a little boring if
Yeah.
it's too much for me
Okay.
when I read all every day. So
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
a little too much. Like if they want to describe the whole building or the whole house, it just, especially when it goes past a paragraph, it kind of loses me a little bit, and I kind of like skim through it because I don't really want to read all the extra stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
once I get it in my head, I think the other stuff is too much extra sometimes when it
Okay.
goes on and on. So that's why I was asking.
So I think you just answered your question, but I would also say, remember we talked about the balance of showing and telling. So
Right.
maybe aiming for like a 75-25 split throughout the whole work.
Hmm.
Um, and also, obviously go according to your gut. Like if you don't like reading all that, then you wouldn't want to write all that. But at the
Right.
same time, um, anything that is in a piece of creative writing should be there for a reason. So, like
Okay.
if you're describing a whole house, does the reader need to know all the details? Or
Right.
are there certain details that help move the story along? So, I think that's a question to answer as well. Like, is every detail here important? And if not, what can go?
Okay.
You
So the
know,
assignment we did last week, should we like email it to you
this is
again?
not a class for submitting writing. It's only
For my
generative in our live sessions. So you can share and we can listen and offer quick feedback, but it's not
Okay.
the kind of class where you submit. Yeah, but I do have other classes where you do. So
Okay.
if you like those, we can definitely chat about them.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
Hope I can get it.
I yeah. Hi everybody. Welcome and it's good to see you.
Hello.
We have about 2 minutes. So Lucretia just asked a great question. If you have a question, um, it's a good time to get some of that attention or not.
Something that really struck me, hi, it's Judy,
Hi,
is
Judy.
that you said last week was about don't explain it to the reader, explain it only if you need to a character. And
Mhm.
and that, could you just say a little more about that?
Sure. So, so anything that is spoken in dialogue in writing, or even if it's just sort of in prose in a paragraph, doesn't have to be dialogue, needs to be for the benefit of the story or the characters in the story, and not for the reader. It's not for the purpose of catching up the reader so that they have the background information. It should be organic to the way the story is flowing and important to move the story forward. So it's for the benefit of the story. So like if a character says, hey, did you find the key? It has to be important for that conversation between those characters and not, to explain to the reader. Like, here's why they need the key. Like it should come out in the story in a way that makes sense for the story and the reader will catch on. Does that help?
Yeah, I'm nodding.
Okay. Okay.
So,
Yeah, like the key example, I mean, this is probably a bad example, but um, if the two characters know what they're talking about, then the reader will catch up. It can't just be like if one of the characters is like, what key? Then of course the other character has to explain, but in a way that would be normal and organic for two people having a conversation who are familiar with things and not the whole backstory because the reader is new to the page.
right, I was finding myself in not dialogue, but catching it in like description and trying to fill in a lot of things and seem sort of artificial. And so that made sense. Although now
Yeah,
I'm like paranoid and I'm sort of like, oh my God, I'm
don't be. So the thing is that this is all stuff that you want to pay attention to in revision. not in original writing. So when you're just generating stuff, just go and let it be ugly and let it be bad and let it be telling. And then when you go back through, say, oh, I'm info dumping here, so I can work on that. Let me not info dump and do other things. Or I I'm, telling and but I can show what the lake feels like or sounds like, That's for revision, and that's where we become artists and we start to really fine tune and sculpt the writing so that it really soars.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. So we're going to jump in because it is 4:01 and we're going to get started. And as always, I'm recording for people who can't make it. So I want to start off just by asking you how your writing has been since we last met and if you noticed any differences based on our first lesson.
Okay. Yes, actually.
Good.
Working at assignment that you gave us,
Hmm.
I was more confident, and it's like the more I wrote, the better the showing went. Like was coming
Nice.
towards you. Like I kept thinking like how would I act this out and show it. So I actually
Yeah.
improved. I actually was impressed with myself. So
Amazing. Oh, that's so great to hear, LaKrisha. I'm so glad. That's wonderful. Anybody else? Yeah, Julie.
Um, I actually have been really, really productive. And I think part of that is because when I now have it a lot more comfortably in my head to just like naturally try to show it. But
Hmm.
like what you said about the first draft, like I'm like, don't panic, just get the story out. And that's really, really helping me. So I kind of have it in the back of my head, but I'm
Hmm.
also just letting myself purge onto the page.
Hmm.
And I've written 10,000, no, 12,898 words since the last class.
Amazing. That is so great. Oh my gosh. It must feel so good.
Yeah, because I'm just like, you can do this. You can do this. Like,
Yeah, you can. That is so fantastic. Oh, Julie, I'm excited. Really cool. Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah,
So
Mary Ellen.
I had kind of an epiphany based on the assignment you gave us because it was write something about as if you were going to tell. And you had suggested I could do it about my character rather than myself, Martha.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
then I thought I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know what she would pick. I don't know. Like it just made me go really deep into thinking about, okay, what are my sources? And if I don't have an
uh-huh,
source, what else could I intuit about her? And
yeah,
then come up with some things. So it was amazing because it was just like a different, for me, it's a very
yeah,
different way of thinking. But I said, that's so important to her as a character. What was she valuing
yeah,
as a young person? So that
uh-huh.
was, and then I went ahead and tried a hand at writing, which was, more, whatever, that was what it was. But the thought
Yeah,
process was very um opening for me.
good. I'm so glad. That's awesome. Wonderful. Linda.
I can, now that you said that, I can relate to that. I didn't realize, but I'm realizing as I'm sitting here, the writing, it was about my own experience, but it gave me insights into stuff that happened that I never really considered before.
Nice.
Remember it from a long time ago. We're talking 30 some years ago.
Wow. Wow.
Yes.
Great.
And I
That's
got some
awesome.
profound insights about myself. So very, things that I
Nice.
kind of knew, but that because I had to ask the questions like, well, what,
Yeah.
because I was about to tell the thing. And then I'm like, no, 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 what were you feeling? And it really drew me in. So it was, yeah.
Awesome. That's
Mm.
great. Oh, I'm so glad to hear it. That's wonderful. Cool. All right, so let's jump in. So this week we're looking at action, so verbs and body language and all kinds of active things that can happen on the page. And it's one great way to show rather than tell. So we're going to go through our lesson, which I sent you guys. This time I sent it, yay. And so you have it, and we'll go through some of it. We'll do a little writing. And we're also going to do some reading. And so I want to start with reading so we can just take a look at a piece and talk about it. This is one of the 4 pieces that are in the top of the lesson. and it's from Brevity, so it's nonfiction. Brevity is a one of my favorite creative nonfiction flash publications. I think the word count is either 1,000 or 750 as the length. I can't remember, but really, really, really strong writing. This is like the New Yorker of flash, I would say. And so this is not a long piece, but what I want us to do when we're reading it is to take a look at the actions. So maybe just jot down like when there's something active that's happening, whether it's a verb or body language or something else that just um, seems active, like it's in a state of motion or movement, but you can see it on the page. So you can also pay attention to verbs and see how many strong active verbs there are compared with lazy helper verbs and that kind of thing. So would anybody like to start and read the first two paragraphs for me?
Sure.
Thank you.
To rummage there was to be let in on a secret. You whispered, you tiptoed. Among the satin, lace, and letters of my mother's was a string of pearls I let trickle across my palm. It had clung to the collarbone of her grandmother, my great-grandmother, Anna B., the one who claimed to be born on the boat coming from Slovakia. Mom and I would roll our eyes. We both would have died in childbirth, we believed, without modern medicine. Sure, born on the boat. I have since worn such necklaces with proper office attire for important meetings where I told grown men what to do with their businesses' marketing budgets, and they listened. I felt brave. I even drove my own car there and back, as if we women have always been doing such things. Anna B., that supposedly water birth babe, never got her license.
Thank you. Would anybody like to take the next two paragraphs? Thank you, Linda.
Okay. She was 95 when she died in 2002. She had a drawer too. Drawers and drawers of things of significance I fingered sacredly. Brooches and costume jewelry, stretched out nylon stockings, embroidered pillowcases, rosaries, a whole drawer of twist ties, and rubber bands and the backs of used envelopes. I touched everything. It was all oddly and otherworldly, important because it was hers. Only after her death did the genealogical records surface to confirm it. Yes, Anna B., born on boat. Anna B.'s mother had two other young children with her and her husband when they set sail. Her husband's names were anglicized from Stephanus and Bronislava to Bertie and Steve. Bertie set out for a new country, that pregnant. Bertie had already lost two infants in Slovakia. Bertie would lose two more children, age 6 and age 8, in the new country, the country of foreign tongues, the country of promise.
Thank you. Would anybody like to finish it for me? Yeah, Mary Ellen, thank you.
Bertie birthed a baby between two continents. I can feel the heat of reverence in my fingertips still, decades removed from my mom's top dresser drawer, where she kept her things of significance. I open my own top dresser drawer. There's Westminster Abbey Bulletin. There's a Westminster Abbey Bulletin, a map guide to Paris, ticket stubs for my trip back to the continent, countries Stephanus and Branislawa traveled to get to my in utero great-grandmother here, to get her only son born, to get her granddaughter, to get to me. There are hospital wristbands identifying my 3 birthed children who survived in sterile rooms with gloved surgeons and nurses, the ones that made it despite the 4 we lost to miscarriage. It is my 15-year-old daughter who holds in her hand the string of pearls and asks to wear them now. They make her look old, too much like a woman who came before her. Someday these things will be yours to wear, yours to bear, I think. watching her in the mirror. I unlatch the strand and put it back in the drawer. You can tell they're real because of the knots, I hear my great-grandmother say, showing me the way we're strung together.
Thank you. So actions, verbs, what jumps out at you? Thank you to the readers.
The one,
Linda?
the one that struck me just now,
Yeah.
she said, feel the heat of reverence. And I'm
Uh-huh.
like, that is so rich. Feel the heat rather
Yeah.
than saying I felt reverence. I felt the heat of reverence. Like it was
Yeah.
something that, yeah, it just,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
what a way
It's a
of
very
putting it.
tactile thing, right? It's very, and it's not even specific. I'm going to be honest. I can feel the
Yeah.
heat of reverence is kind of telling, to be honest, but it's a rich language construction, so I can live with
Okay,
it.
so it is telling. All right.
Yeah, it is. I can feel the heat of
Understood.
reverence. Okay, I believe you. Like
Yeah.
the question to ask, is it showing or telling, is can I see it with my own eyes, or am I trusting the reader that they're not lying to me?
Okay.
So
Okay.
I
All
can feel
right.
the heat of reverence in my fingertips. I still think is beautiful. And remember, we said it's not bad to tell, it's just better to show, and we need to balance the two. So I do think that that's fine. I mean, look, Birdie birthed the baby between two continents is right before it. There's alliteration, which the sound Birdie birthed a baby between all those bees is like really we feel it as we're reading it, even if we're reading it in our heads. But birthed is a very active thing. Like there's a sense of motion of like the boat's moving as she's doing this, and that's repeated throughout. Repetition is important because it draws your attention to something that the reader really wants you to pay attention to. So that's a pretty active and rich sentence. So it's important to have something that we can sit with
So,
right after, you know?
so then I guess I was tricked because I feel like
Hmm.
yeah, I'm still confused. I'm still like working my way around show. I am,
Sure,
having
sure.
been a left brain writer. So in my mind, maybe, but yeah, and maybe that's the thing. It's a right brain telling, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Because that's what I'm thinking. I think that's what's happening to me. I'm looking at it, the heat of reverence. Like, I guess because in my mind, she didn't say I felt reverent, but she still said she felt something. That's right. Okay.
So
Right.
does anybody have a suggestion for how this could be showing?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking as I'm looking at it. Yeah. I don't know.
Anybody want to try it? Because yeah, Mary Ellen, did you
I
have
was
a,
going to say, the heat of reverence turned my fingertips red or something like that, like some visual clue.
yes, or burned my fingertips, right? The heat of
Okay.
reverence burned my fingers. I mean,
Okay. Okay.
I don't know if it's any better because I do think that this telling sentence is good.
Yeah, I
Oh
like
I
it.
yeah.
think it's her
Yeah,
unique voice.
I'm just I'm working it out in my
Yes.
mind why I'm just learning this. So
So
yeah.
no, it's okay. No, no, no apologies. But like the heat of reverence burned my fingertips still is like I can feel burning. This that verb burned,
Okay.
it becomes more active than I can feel, right?
Okay. Okay.
Right.
So
Okay.
yeah, so I think that could be a way to do
Okay.
it. But yes, and Mary Ellen's suggestion as well. So what
Okay.
else? Like what else
How,
jumped out to you guys?
but
Yeah.
how about that sentence, that paragraph that begins, I have since worn such necklaces, and
Uh-huh.
all of that, that's all telling though, right? Because we're not, or is it because we could see, if we were there, we would have seen her wearing the necklace? So I'm a little confused also, I guess, like,
Yeah.
so is that a telling?
So that is telling because we don't even know what kind of necklace it is, like we
Right.
know, hold on, I'm gonna sneeze. I'm sorry. Excuse me. So, in the paragraph before, we see the pearls trickle across my palms. We really see that, right? Like you
Right.
can feel the pearls. So there's like that word trickle is so rich and it's like very tactile, and that we can see. So then I've since worn such necklaces with proper office attire for important meetings. She's deliberately not being specific. Such necklaces, proper office attire, important meetings. So she doesn't want us to know the specifics of those because that's not what's important to this piece, you know? And so when we get through, you know, and we're also hearing her voice. I told grown men what to do with their businesses, marketing budgets, and they listened. So we don't need to see their faces. She doesn't want us to see their faces. They don't matter as in that to this story. It's giving us a little bit of context about her. But what really becomes vivid, I think, is here. I even drove my own car there and back. And it doesn't matter what kind of car it is, because that's not important for the story. It's the fact of independence and driving, the act of driving there and back, as if we women have always been doing such things, which is a great, authentic voice. And then Anna B, that supposedly water birthed babe, again, water birthed babe, really vivid, never got her license. So we're getting specific when it's important to this story.
But it's not, it's still telling is what you're saying, but it's just,
The
I think,
first,
yeah,
the
okay.
first sentence is, the first two sentences are, and then
Mhm.
the last two are showing.
Okay, okay.
Julie?
But what, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Julie,
Well,
go ahead.
yeah, okay. And yeah, for me, what I felt like when I was reading it, because it first start off with the rummaging and the tiptoeing and the how she let the stuff trickle. So I'm like, okay, we've got the action going on, and then we got like a little balance of telling, and then we got some more action, and then telling. So I felt like it was the action was focusing you on what she thought was the most important thing, like her tactile exploration of these
Mm-hmm.
pieces
Yep.
were what brings her the closeness that she has
Mm-hmm.
to her. And
Yes.
and so she wants you to see that and feel that, and then the rest she can just tell you, and then you get to like again with the car,
Mm-hmm.
and then I just felt like for me, I felt the bouncing was actually pretty good because I could see in my mind
Mm-hmm.
how how she developed like the whole thing at the end, like it all brought it together because
Yeah.
it's her being with these pieces, and then how does this person's view of existence and how she brought children into the world connect to me and connect to my children when they're touching these pieces at the end,
Yes.
you know?
Yeah. I mean, listen, there's so much symbolism in this. For example, a string of pearls I let trickle across my palm. That is a metaphor. I mean, it's a literal necklace, but it's a metaphor for the trickle down the generations and the generations strung together, which, by the way we're strung together in the very bottom. So the pearl necklace is sort of the thread that goes through this piece. And if we're looking at, you know, showing rather than telling, I mean, today's lesson is about verbs and action, but another way that we show, not tell, is through specific details and and also dialogue. Well, we have that all of that in here. So we have satin, lace, and letters. We have mom and I rolling our eyes. We have what else? Hold on a second. I fingered, which is a great verb, sacredly. And this is all specific details. Brooches, costume jewelry, stretched out nylon stockings, embroidered pillowcases, rosaries, a whole drawer of twist ties and rubber bands, and the backs of used envelopes. Like, it's not a paragraph of details. It's more than I would probably include, but it's got a rhythm and a musicality to it. And I think we can see almost everything here, you know? And so I think that this piece uses different measures of showing rather than telling
Okay.
throughout, like really well, um,
So
to get across a point. Yeah.
you're
Linda?
saying that, so what I think what you're saying here is that fingered sacredly brooches and the fact that she's doing this, you said it's very tactile, it's very visual.
Hmm.
That's an example of showing. That's what you're
Yeah.
saying. Rather than
Hmm.
saying yeah, just the fact, all of this activity, all of these things and all okay. Instead
Yeah.
of, oh, there
So,
was some very meaningful things in the drawer,
yeah.
you know? Yeah,
Exactly, exactly.
okay.
So, and the verb fingered is like this is tactile, you know, like it's and you know, sacredly, normally I do not like adverbs, which we'll get into in a minute, but I fingered sacredly brooches and costume jewelry, I can live with that because Sacredly here is doing a good job. It's telling us, how she touched these things and how she revered them, So, um, I think, but the verb fingered is like, she could just say, I held, I touched. We wouldn't really get that, but I fingered. She's like really taking time with it, I clutched would be different. So I think that choosing that verb makes a huge difference. And that's just one example, like genealogical records surface. So I love that because we're talking about a boat bobbing on the waves and this is surfacing. And so she's really like getting us into that whole, idea of, you know, sailing from one place to another and whatever. So there's a lot in here that I think she does to make it show. Yeah. Is there anything else that you guys noticed that you thought did a really good job or that you really didn't like also? Or you thought wasn't necessary to the story?
I feel like the top when she says this very first one, she said to rummage was let in on a secret, you whispered, you tiptoed. I almost feel like, I don't know,
Yeah.
maybe she was overdoing it with to be the word secret. Like the whispering and tiptoeing is implying some secret clandestine thing. I
Yeah.
don't know. Yeah. Like maybe the first sentence
Yeah.
wasn't as necessary. I don't know.
Okay. Sure. And it really depends on the title for that as well. Because if you don't look at the title, you're like, where are we? So yeah, no, I get that. Any questions? Any thoughts? So we'll come back to another thing to read in a little bit, but let's then go from there and talk about how we can write more actively. And the first way to do that, easiest way to do that is with verbs. So I've said I don't really love adverbs. There are times when they really pull their weight. Most of the time, adverbs are a placeholder when the verb is lazy. And so, again, first draft, fine, have a lot of adverbs. But when you're going back and revising, it's a great invitation to take a look and say, could I do a better verb here? Could there be some kind of action that would, make it irrelevant to have an adverb here? So, for example, when we say a line of dialogue and it's said angrily, couldn't we instead yell or shout or bark, instead of said angrily? That way, each of those, yelling, shouting, barking, are very different things. So we can, as the writer, determine what kind of anger is this character showing when they speak. Instead of said angrily, you and I would see very different things because maybe I'm angry in ways that are different from how you're angry. And so then all of a sudden it's not universally relatable. It's our own interpretation, and we're not really with the story anymore. So I do think that we can get more active with our verbs or in describing our verbs. And I want to show you, this is in the handout, but I'm going to share my screen if you don't have it near you. And if you look at this example here, there's two examples. So the first one, I walked cautiously across the room to the back door. I walked. So again, we don't really know how the person is walking, and cautiously leaves room for interpretation. But if we look at the second example, I scanned the room, checking for tripwires, pressure plates, anything that looked like it might be a trap. Clear. I darted for the door. Now, it's a lot more words, but I think we can see the second example, whereas the first one, I don't really think we can, right? In the second example here, yes, Mary Ellen, yeah.
I feel like, and again, this is maybe because I'm doing nonfiction, but I feel like there's clearly a much better picture in the second example, but I feel like the meaning is different because to dart to me is
it is.
very different than walking cautiously.
Right.
Like
It's
cautiously, I
way
feel
more
like it's
precise.
slow, but I feel like walking cautiously is walking slowly, and darting is quick. So I feel almost like the meaning has changed.
Well, in the second example, the walking is happening the whole time. And at the end, the speaker darts for the door. But, I scan the room, checking for things and, clear. I mean, so there's a caution there at first and then a quick escape. But the difference, and you're right, it is different, but the difference is that the writer is creating a scene in the second example that is so vivid, there's no questioning what's happening, and the reader is there the whole time, the way the writer wants them to be. In the first sentence, the reader is maybe there, maybe tuning out because it's kind of a boring sentence. I walked cautiously across the room to the back door. I don't really care about that. But in the second example, I'm really curious. Like, why? Why do you think it's a trap? What's going on here? Who would have said tripwires? Like, like I feel a little intensity. I darted for the door. Oh, great. Okay. Did you make it out? Like, there's an emotion in me that's evoked by the second example, and I don't have any emotions about the first. Does that make sense, Mary Ellen?
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. I feel like I would say I would keep the second, but then the last sentence, instead of I darted for the door, I would say something like, finally, I reached the door, or something like that, because I feel like that darting motion. I'm very literal. I'm an academic, I'm pedantic, but to me,
Uh-huh.
walking cautiously is different than scanning and then darting. As a
Okay. And that's, yeah, for you as the writer, you would write it differently,
I
but
would
you
write
would
the
write it
last
the way that you needed it to be seen by the reader,
Right.
you
I would
know?
write the last sentence differently, but you're right. I mean, there's no question that the second version is much more, it's much richer, it's much more capturing for someone's, it's much more vivid.
It's more active too. Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
right. And it's not right or wrong. It's just let's look at the difference. Let's understand the difference here. In the second example there, she muttered incoherently. Muttered's a good verb, but incoherently means like we can't understand, right? But the second one, she muttered half words that didn't make any sense. It just makes it a little more explicit. And, half words, like that's just getting clearer. Like I might almost hear that. Whereas she muttered incoherently, I don't know that I'm hearing anything. It's twice as many words, but it's also just, I have a better sense. So again, could you say she muttered incoherently? Yeah, you could. It's a choice, but I do think the second example brings me to see more clearly the picture that the writer wants to convey. And that's really what this is. That's, when we show rather than tell, we are doing more of the work for the reader so they can have a better experience. So if it's all telling, then the reader's sort of coasting through and they don't have to have any skin in the game. But when it's showing, it's a relationship between writer and reader. It's a conversation. And that's really powerful. So it just depends what you want to do. Any questions? Comments? Okay, so one other thing we can do with verbs is to get rid of passive voice. Passive voice, if you're a scientific writer, is the norm. It's what you do in a lot of fields. In creative writing, it is a no-no. And this was hammered into me by a high school English teacher many, 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 many years ago. And so I see it all the time. Like I can spot it on the page. He really drilled it into us. But passive voice basically flips sentences around so that the action is sort of sleepy and the subject is now the object. So like we'll see some examples in a minute. In fact, I'll show you here in this chart of purple here, but like let's look at these examples first. So at the top of the page, Bob was bitten by the zombie. So the zombie is doing the action and Bob, it's happening to him. The sentence is really backwards. And so we have to flip it around like the zombie bit Bob, or, this one here. Bob screamed, jerking his leg from the zombie's mouth. Like that's really active. That's really happening on the page. But when to spot passive voice, you have a helper verb, like a form of to be, and then the past tense of the verb. So was bitten. So when you see those two together, you're like, okay, I can flip it. And I bet the subject is somewhere hanging out at the end of the sentence. So it's just, I actually find it fun. That's how geeky I am as a word nerd, and flipping sentences around so that I can make it more active. So this chart, which you guys have, shows a lot of constructions of helper verbs and past verb tense. So it's easy to flip these around. The dog has walked by his owner, the man walked the dog, just flipping it. There are times that we want passive voice. So for example, let me show you, I have one here. When to use passive voice. Research papers, lab reports, all of that, you do want that because it becomes distant and it's unbiased. It's just like, this is what happened. If you also don't want the emphasis on whoever's perpetrating something. So in creative writing, like here, I'm looking at this paragraph, the woman was sentenced to 5 years in jail. The person who's doing the sentencing is not important to the story. So we don't need to be like the judge sentenced the woman to 5 years. Like, it's more important that the woman got this jail sentence. And so the judge doesn't matter here. So we don't need that, So it's just a question of like, where's my emphasis? Where do I want it to be? Any questions about passive voice? So I do think that there are so many great active verbs that we never use. And that's something you want to take a look at because, I mean, there are like lists and charts of verbs out there on the internet. You can always find them. And look around because you never know when you could discover something fantastic and it just elevates your sentences or changes the course of the story because they leaped instead of hopped, instead of jumped, instead of cantered, instead of, you know what I'm saying? Like each of those verbs changes the way the scene goes. And so you can really have fun with verbs again in revision because if you pressure yourself while you're writing a first draft to come up with the best verb on the planet, you will not get anything written. So you want to make sure that this is in your toolbox. And when we go back through and revise, we do one thing at a time. So like maybe today I'm looking at my first draft and I'm just looking at the verbs and the action. That's all I'm going to look at. Another day I'll go back and look at details or, whatever, just to make it easy on yourself. Is there a
Lynn?
question, Mary Ellen?
Yeah,
Yes.
I had a question, which I agree completely. As somebody who writes too much in the passive voice, I agree completely about the active voice and how important it is. But sometimes, do you ever feel when you're reading something that people have stretched for a verb? And I'll give an example. I was looking at something I had written today, and it was in more of an editing mode. I was adding some information, and I saw that I was writing about an event at Chautauqua Institute in the late 1800s, and Susan B. Anthony was speaking, and she looked out at the audience, and the women were supporting her by wearing yellow ribbons. So I wrote that the women wore yellow ribbons, and I thought that's kind of boring. Like the women,
Okay.
like so first I tried boasted. Boasted wasn't because they were actually wearing them. So then the only thing I could come up with was like sported yellow ribbons. But I feel like that word sported for the late 19th century, it just felt like
doesn't fit.
And sometimes when I'm reading, I can see the author really was like stretching for all these different, like it's almost making me the reader do too much work.
Yes, and I don't like verbs like sported and boasted. They're used all the time, and I don't love them, And so I feel like, well, what could we do? So sometimes just pull out a thesaurus and see what else comes up for war, and see, or like you could say, sometimes it might be maybe the verb isn't as important in that sentence as how you paint the picture. So like, on their lapels, on their sleeves, and on their on the feathers on their hats were yellow ribbons to support whatever.
Women had pinned yellow ribbons or something.
Exactly. So there maybe the verb is not the heavy lifter, but it's the let's paint set the scene so that people can see that they were like, oh, all these yellow ribbons are everywhere, or they were tied in hair or whatever. Like, so I think then you choose like, okay, the verb doesn't matter here, and the verb could actually detract from the story. So I'm going to focus on the details, painting the picture with words. Yeah.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah, sure. Okay, so there is a reason for that, cliche, actions speak louder than words, because when somebody does something, it's way more vivid than if we just try to recount it or explain it. And so you want to remember that like when you are building a sense of character in a book or in an essay or whatever, whether it's real people or made up characters, all of their actions, their body language, their tics and phrases that they repeat, that shows a lot about their specific individual character. And that's also how it keeps the story interesting, So we looked at a passage from Outlander last week, and I don't like this phrase, but what Diana Gabaldon does with the character of Claire in those books is she has a phrase that she repeats when she's frustrated. It's like an exclamation, and it's intended to show her as a 20th century person. And she says, Jesus H. Roosevelt Christ. And so it's like her way of swearing, but not swearing. And obviously, Roosevelt would be a 20th century person. And even just saying, the Lord's name in vain would be something that maybe in the 20th century you do, but not in the 18th century. And so there's repetition of that, but it really says something about her character, that she would exclaim in that way, that she would swear or whatever. So that becomes identifiable with that character. And their actions can too. So it's interesting when you're writing about people, think about something that they do all the time. Like, do they bite their nails? Do they tap their foot while they're talking? Or they're, they have a pen or a pencil like in their hair, or like all of these things are actions that also build character. And so those little nuances, like Mary Ellen, for your book, that could be important. Like, what were some things that Martha did regularly that became her signature, that people knew, oh, that's Martha, So think about giving your characters something to do. And so if they're sitting around and talking, even if it's an essay about, family birthday party or something, talking heads are really boring. But when characters are doing things, even if it's doing the dishes while they're talking, and how they do the dishes, like maybe balancing the crystal and 2 fingers so that she didn't break it, or holding it up to the light to see if all the water spots had dried or whatever, like those little actions add interest to scenes. And so they could keep talking, but they're doing things at the same time, give an active job or an interesting hobby, or, I think about, like, I haven't really written about him, but my kid's high school principal, he also does woodworking. And so I've had, a bunch of kids graduate in the last 4 years, all four. And the principal would make things out of wood to give to each of the graduating seniors. That's a really interesting detail about a character. So if I were to write about him, I'd want to somehow weave it in. So think about what those actions are. At the same time, when you're writing a story, any story, there's a goal, something there, you're heading to something. So goals require action. You have to do things to get to the goal. And you could think about, what is that? So like, for example, in a detective story, the goal is to figure out who did it, who's the serial killer. So what kind of evidence are we going to have along the way? What kind of actions are we going to take to try to discover it? So think about actions that make sense for the story, that move it along, that also explain about the character, not just superfluous actions, but actions move stories along and they keep us interested. We don't want to just hear a bunch of talking heads. Any questions about that? Okay. Actions come in a lot of different ways. So it can be the literal things we do. It can also be body language, as I mentioned earlier. It could be touch. So, someone laying a hand on somebody else's hand. Body language, like if someone's talking and you make a face and like you try to describe, like they winced or they roll their eyes or, whatever it is. That also conveys a message. That it also gets very, very detailed. In the handout, there is a list of some as choices. You can probably come up with others, but folded arms or hunched shoulders or twisting your hands together, cracking your knuckles, like all of that body language says something, and it can create a feeling in the scene. It can create agitation, rudeness, nervousness, joy, whatever body language you come up with. It can also enhance your dialogue, so they can go hand in hand. Dialogue is one of our ways of showing that we'll learn about in a coming week, but put an action or body language with dialogue and it's even more powerful. It can also contrast. So like in dialogue, somebody's saying something, but they're acting the opposite way. So what would be an example of like somebody's saying something, but they're acting differently, so you know that it's not true or that they're lying or something? What could be an example? Sandra, do you have an idea?
I am thinking of Bill Clinton. I did
Okay.
not have whatever with that woman. His head bobbing up and down.
Okay. It's a good one. Yep. It's a good one. Anybody else? Could be someone from your life too. Like something a parent did, like somebody who's yelling, "I'm not mad." Like that doesn't make sense. You're yelling, or like a parent who's like, "I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed." Like how would you I mean, that's the worst, right? When you're a kid, like, oh no, so how would you write that? Like, how would you show the voice as like, dead calm and the kid's shaking? Like, oh my God, my parents, like you can build that scene and it says so much. So body language is a way of enhancing or sending a message or showing something different like that. And touch is another one. It's a huge part of body language. It's a huge part of being human. It creates action. And so, think about in life when like a baby cries, you pick them up and they're held against you with warmth and they stop crying. That touch makes all the difference. So you can include touch in your characters in your writing, but they also send a message. So like a heart pounding, your heart beating in your temples, wet palms, damp palms. Trying to think. We're going to talk about this too, but the character can't know if they're blushing, but they can feel the heat in their face. Like that's really important to be aware of when you're writing. Like, what does the character actually see versus what do they feel? So I've had lots of edits of clients writing where I say, I can't see that I'm blushing. I'm not looking in the mirror, but I can feel my face flush. I can feel, like what are those sensations? So we want to think about how a visceral response or a touch can say a lot. Any thoughts, questions about that? Okay, so let's look at another piece. And I have several. Okay, I think we're going to do this one. All right. Okay, so this piece is in Creative Nonfiction magazine, and it's an essay as well. It's a flash piece, so it's kind of short. But let's take a look at the actions, the body language, the visceral responses, sounds. What jumps out is showing to you when we read this. So I'll start it off and then I'll ask for some volunteers. It's called Men Come Here. Men come here like they own the place. Roll up the road, bump over the apron, and tear through the gravel, leaving dirt tracks. I hear them before I see them. Hear their pickups, dump trucks, vans. Music through cracked windows. Sometimes they idle before getting out. I hear their boots. The divorcee who used to live here installed a security system. My husband and I debated disconnecting it, but he's a true crime reporter who covers murders, and I'm alone here during the day. A security technician came to fix the wiring. He walked from room to room, aligning each window oh, aligning each window sensor and commenting on photos. Is that you? He said, looking back and forth between me and a honeymoon shot. He stuck a red sign to the back door, letting one of the cats out. The cat let himself back in because he's scared of bees and the outdoors. The furnace repairman loves the cats. While fixing the motor, he welcomed them into the hot closet. On his second visit to replace some pump or gauge, he didn't go straight to the furnace, just stayed in the hall, talking and petting. Who would like to pick it up from there?
I can
Anyone?
do it. Is it,
Thanks, Mary Ellen. Yeah.
we used to live in Manhattan on the 10th floor of a midtown building. Now we're in a house, something I've always wanted. My husband trains to the city, and I take care of our boys, our house, and the yard. The deal was, since my husband would be spending more hours out of the house, I would take up more of the chores: garbage, weeding, scooping muck from gutters. But I was naive. I didn't know how many tasks I couldn't do myself, how many men I would need. I work from home to pay bills for things like security and furnace repair. We live in a safe town, but I paid an electrician to install a motion sensor on the garage spotlight. He told me about his thing with numbers. I like them to be even. To the kitchen ceiling, he said, 7 cable heads? I'd like to see 8. The spotlight switch was up, but the bulb wasn't on. The electrician hunted for a second switch, hoping to force the two to agree. I need all the switches to be aligned, he said. He found 2 more switches and chafed at the riddle.
Thank you. Who would like to pick it up from there? Sandra, thank you.
The electrician ran out of time before he could rewire the shed's coach light, so he sent his apprentice a week later. I watched from the dining room as he bolted from the shed, leapt over the stone wall, and crisscrossed the grass, screaming, "Fuck, fuck." When he calmed down, he told me through the screen, "Yellow jackets. They stung me like 50 times." He pulled up his pant leg. 3 red bumps swelled near his ankle. "I'm sorry," I said, followed by the only other thing I could think of. If my kids were home, they would have been scared. He pushed his pant leg down and straightened. "I'm fine. Thanks for asking." I shut and latched the glass door.
Thank you. All right. Who would like to pick it up from there? Julie, thank you. Julie.
So then a pest controller came for the yellow jackets. He slid over the retaining wall in his protective white suit, sprayed an old log, and left. Septic called ahead, cleaned out the tank, and curled a stamped yellow postcard in the door handle. Oil never enters the drive, just leaves his rig on the road and drags the hose until the external fill point. Our second fall in the house, storm water cut through our lawn, bringing with it sticks and leaves, shards of Corona bottles, used Band-Aids. Water soaked the living room. I called the landscaper and led him down the new creek bed that now bisected our yard. He poked the mud with his wolverines and asked me questions about my house, my background, my parents. I told him both my parents are dead. Before he left, he hugged me. He came back a few days later with an estimate. Again, a hug. He hugged me and said he was sorry about the recent death of my mom and both my parents. He shook his head. I texted my husband and 2 friends. Is it weird that a landscaper hugged me? Yes, they said. Landscapers shouldn't hug homeowners. I don't want him to come back, I said. No, they all agreed. Tell him not to come back.
Thank you. Okay. Does anybody want to finish it off for us? Any takers? I'll do it. Oh, Linda, great. Linda, you go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah,
I
thanks.
wrote an email, I made up a story, said that my mother-in-law knows a landscaper she trusts. We live in a safe town and I'm a low-risk victim, but I made up the story rather than tell him to stop it with the hugging because I'm alone here during the day and he knows where I live. Meanwhile, we still had water in the living room. I called a contractor. What a beautiful spot, he said. You don't even need to lock your doors. So many doors, lock, 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 lock. So many windows, 18 on the ground floor alone. I didn't realize the whole first year we lived here that one living room window wasn't actually locked. Couldn't lock since the keeper was missing. At the hardware store, I tried to match the sliding sash lock exactly, but the new keeper didn't fit. With a drill, I widened the opening. It still didn't line up. I drilled, drilled, drilled to force it. I slid the lock closed and pounded on the window with a rubber mallet until I couldn't open it again. I told my husband, I fixed the lock. Don't ever try to open that window. We live in a safe town and I pay men to check and fix and fill and empty things I can't. Men sweep the chimney and insulate the well. One patched a crack in the foundation. 3 dug a drainage easement. It took 4 men to cut down the dead yellow birch. Men come here to make the place safer, and I lock all the doors and windows, lock myself into this house I've always wanted. Wow.
Thank you. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, it's an intense story. So what stands out to you as showing? So it could be actions, it could be verbs, it could be other things. Like what really jumped out at you guys?
Well, she does a great job of just painting this the irony of, you know, living in such a safe place but feeling so unsafe because of her dependence on all these strange men.
Yeah, yeah. So tell me, guys, what do you hear? What are you seeing as like, wow, those words were great, or that detail really stood out for me, or I can hear this, I can feel it, I can see it happening. Any instances of that?
I liked where she kind of slowed it down about the 1, 2, 3, 4th paragraph down where she said, her husband would be spending more time out. She would take up more of the chores. And then she slowed it down, just like garbage, weeding, scooping muck from gutters. I liked that kind of
Mm-hmm.
sort of emphasis. And then how many men I would need. I just like that sort of
Yeah,
variation in the rhythm of
yeah.
what you're doing.
That's a great point, Mary Ellen. And you know, it's really important to vary your sentence length. I think I said that last week, but it has different effects on the reader. It also keeps your attention when it's not, if it's too long, you feel sleepy. If it's too short and staccato, you get out of breath when you're reading. And so it's great to have that flow and keep the attention. But yeah, garbage, period. Like we can see it, you know, weeding. It's in the action of weeding. Scooping muck from gutters. You can see that too. I always like every time I read this, my husband trains to the city. She means he rides the train to the city, like, but that's a verb. And I think that's pretty cool because I don't think I would say that. I would say rides a train, which is a lot of extra words, but my husband trains to the city. It's like, whew, I see him going. You know what I mean? Like, it's just unique. It's a unique way to do it. Linda, what were you going to say?
I'm just struck by and I'm wondering, I'm trying to figure out, you know, she seems to be making a statement about men, having
Yeah.
men, like this thing about when she starts it out, like she's making some sort of a point. Like, I'm, you know, because men, one comes for this. Well, even she ends it off with the men. The men
Mm-hmm.
come, you know, I'm not safe,
Mm-hmm.
and the men. And that's what I feel, I don't know, I kind of identify with that. Like, I almost feel like she's saying, you know, I need these men, you know, but she really doesn't in a way because she's doing
Uh-huh.
all of this stuff. She, you know,
Uh-huh.
while she's needing these men and they own the place and all this, she's the one that's doing all of this stuff, you know,
Yeah.
sticking her hands in the gutters. She went to the store and she's showing, you know, how she wasn't going to let that window win, you know.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's really
Meanwhile, at the
vivid, isn't
same
it?
time, she's like, but I had the men come and do, I don't know. I don't know what I'm saying, actually. I just feel like there's some kind
Yeah.
of, back and forth thing going on.
Yes,
Yeah.
for sure. For sure. Julie?
Yeah.
What I found really interesting too is, I mean, obviously she's annoyed that she has all these men around
Uh-huh.
and she doesn't feel safe
Yeah.
because she has all the men around. But the men are are just quirky, normal people.
Yes.
Like
Yeah.
there's nothing scary about any of these men. They're
No.
just so it's like this weird because I'm hearing it and I'm like, she's completely lost her mind. Like
Yeah.
I see
Well,
the actions, it's like,
Yep.
yeah, that one likes cats, and that one just
Yeah.
wants to know about her family because he's making conversation. You know,
Right.
like,
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I actually agree with Julie. I feel like as I heard it, I feel like the story's not really about the men. It's about
Mhm.
her. And I feel
oh,
like she's
yeah.
very, and I
Yeah.
feel like she's very twisted up. This house and these men and all this living in the suburbs. And she's kind of not able to relax and be herself. She's twisted, she's locked in. So
Yep.
but the other thing I found really interesting, and I don't think this is kind of showing, but in the last paragraph, she talks about 1 patched a crack in the foundation, 3 dug a drainage, and 4 cut down the dead yellow birch tree. I love it that she skipped 2. It was like
Yeah.
1, 3, 4. So it's a little bit of a surprise. Like there's a
Mm.
little rhythm, but there's
Yep.
also a little bit of a surprise there, which I really liked that she did that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is not in any way about the men. It's about her
No.
getting what she
Yeah.
wants and not wanting what she got.
Right.
And
And also the
yeah.
conflict that she has to rely on these men, it's almost as though she resents it in some way. I don't know, like,
Sure. Yeah.
yeah, you
Resents
know
her
what I mean?
husband. She
Yeah.
resents her husband training off to
Yeah, and she's got all these other men crawling around the house.
Yeah. Sandra, what were you gonna say?
I think it's more, I think you can kind of sum it up in that you can take her out of the city, but you can't take the city out of her.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. Absolutely.
It's funny because
Um,
I can relate. I grew up in a suburb in Queens, a suburb of
okay.
Manhattan,
Yeah.
and we moved up and we still, and even still now, and
Yeah.
my neighbors leave doors open. Like, what are you, crazy? I mean, we're on Long Island. We're not in the middle of paradise, but still,
Uh-huh.
I grew up in a different way and it affects a lot of things. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
I relate to this
Anything
woman
yeah.
too.
Yeah. Sandra?
I think another thing is just the different perspective between men and women. The
Yes.
men feel 100% safe.
Yeah.
Whereas, I think any woman can relate to not feeling safe in the same environment where men feel safe. I mean, I'm
For
on my
sure.
husband's case all the time. Would you shut the door? Would you make sure the garage door closed all the way? Hold on. We
Yep.
have to make sure the garage door doesn't open back up again.
Yep.
Why
Yep. It's true.
would you please lock? Can you lock the door? Lock the door. Oh, there's
Yeah.
nothing there to be stolen. What if they take
Yeah.
the garage remote? What do they have?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thing.
Yeah,
But
for
she
sure.
says
For
it-
sure.
And in the beginning, she says like they own the place. So that's kind
Yeah.
of to what you said about they feel safe. They don't, they just own the place. They trample all over things. They're not,
Zero
Yeah,
risk.
for sure.
yeah.
Anything else about the writing? Clearly this spoke to you guys. The piece, resonated in some way. And I do think it has a lot to do with how she wrote it. Not the topic. I think any of us could write about this topic and it would be in a different way, but we may not be as successful in eliciting response and connection based on how we choose to tell the story. And that's really true. There's no new topics, no new stories, just new ways of looking at them or what we bring to the story. And so one last dip into how did she do this? Like, what about the language or the word choice or the details, really rang true for you? But
Oh,
which, yeah,
even when she was talking about the windows, like she was I got the point really when she was like lock, 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 and you could
yeah,
picture it.
yeah,
She's
Yeah.
locking,
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
really dramatic for me. Hit me in the,
Yeah.
I got it. She didn't even
Okay,
have to say so many windows, so many doors almost, you know.
sure.
Or how
Um,
suddenly unsafe she felt to realize that for the past year, a window had been unlocked the whole time. And she was
Yeah,
horrified.
yeah,
I have
yeah.
a question. So some of what she did was she used this dialogue. But I found, and I don't know if this, I guess this was probably intentional. I wonder what people think is that the dialogue isn't what I would call like snappy dialogue. Like she says, I said, they said, they
Yeah,
repeat the word, is it weird that the landscaper hugged me? Yeah, landscapers shouldn't hug. I don't want him to come back. Tell him not to come back. It's on the, and then down below, she called someone and it's like he said she didn't like use any kind of a more active verb of people how people are speaking. Now maybe that's just to avoid clutter. It's like I'm sure it's intentional, but why is the language not varied there?
so, and we'll go into this when we talk about dialogue, but I always do he said, she said, I don't change the verb because the act of saying it is less important than what is said. And so if I get all fancy with my verbs about how it was said,
Uh-huh.
then that becomes the focus. And if you want the actual quotes to be the focus, then you should really play down how it's said. They said, she said, he said, just let the dialogue itself do its job. But we'll go into detail when we get into dialogue. And Julie has been waiting to make a comment. So, Julie, what were you going to say?
Oh, I'm like, I don't even necessarily remember what it was, but I think it was, I think for me, like everything was just so vivid. Like
Yeah,
each little piece, I could see exactly, but I could also see like her, even if she didn't say it, I could still feel her trepidation with
yeah,
every single person that walked into the room. And it's just like the guy with the cats, and she's like, he's not working. Like she never said it, but it's like I could almost feel her rage. Why isn't he working? He's petting
right.
cats, you know?
Yes,
And
yeah,
she
for
she
sure.
painted that with her language, with how
Yeah,
she described it.
right. She trusted us, the reader, to get it.
Right.
And,
And she didn't
we're
have to
smart enough. Yeah,
say, right. Like, I think I do that. Like, I kind of maybe explain or do this, and I'm like, oh, yeah, it's not necessary. Like, the picture was painted, and you get that she is not pleased, you know?
yes, yep. Great. This is awesome. And feel free to take a look at it again. The link is in the lesson I sent you. And, really to take a look at like, what about this is so good? What is so rich? How does she do it? I love coming back to pieces that I've read before and discovering something new and like, oh, that's how they did that. And oh, now that speaks to me or whatever. But I want to give you guys some time to write, and then we have a little bit of time to share. So I'm going to give you two writing exercises. They are in the handout, but I'll put them in the chat and choose the one that speaks most to you. So one of them is to think of an activity that you do a lot or that you love to do. It could be a sport, it could be baking, it could be drawing or whatever. And I invite you to write about it using active verbs to create that action of this activity on the page. So the reader feels like they're doing it with you. The other one is to think about a feeling that you have and write about it using only action and sensory detail. So don't tell me you're sad, show me that you're sad. Or don't tell me that you're, excited, show me that you're excited. They're not easy exercises. So pick one that you think you can try and be gentle with yourself because it will take a little bit of effort. It's 4 minutes after, so I'm going to say we're going to go until 20 after, and then we'll reconvene. Okay? And see what you come up with. Cool.
She slid underneath the water, an instant numbing. The cicadas, the construction next door, the terror.
Two minutes left, you guys. All right, everybody, why don't you come on back? Let's hear how that went. How did it go? Anybody want to share what you wrote or talk about it?
It's hard, but I'll say this much without reading it because it's not good enough to read.
Right?
I'll
Okay.
say this much. It's this discussion, and it's getting me writing and thinking much differently, much more vividly. I'm just not crazy about what I wrote, but I'm getting someplace different.
Good. That's
Which
great.
is, yeah,
Good.
I'll say that much.
That's all we can ask for. Yes.
I'll read. Mine's not polished or good, but I was trying.
Well,
And
no
I
apologies. You know what? In this class, you just say, I'll read, and then you read.
I'll read.
That's it.
And
Yep.
this is not about me. Again, it's about my character because I'm
That's fine.
trying.
Yeah.
Suddenly, a fur-covered bear careened into the classroom, causing the pupils studying there to jump. "What's that crazy animal?" someone screamed. The hairy beast let out a fierce roar whose timbre lost its frightening qualities due to the choked laughter running at a steady beat beneath it. "It's Martha, it's Martha," chorused the younger students. "She's at it again," smiled an older pupil indulgently. Suddenly, the bear swept off her fur, the mangy hat, droopy scarf, long coat, and oversized mittens, revealing the grinning face of Chamberlain's head teacher, Martha Van Rensselaer. "You've perfected the art of dressing up," remarked the laughing student nearest Martha. "Nothing brings me more pleasure," Martha chuckled.
Love it. That's awesome.
She loved to dress up, so that's,
That's great. That really shows it. That's a great job. Sandra and then Julie.
Okay. The streak of light breaks through between the curtains and across my pillow, blinding me until I reposition my head a few inches over. How dare the sun wake me on my day off? I grab my cell phone from the nightstand. More Caitlin Clark or Angel Reese headlines? Oh yes, malicious compliance stories, ridiculous in-laws stories, and kitties. Lots and lots of adorable kitties. Maybe I'll turn into a crazy cat lady when I'm old and alone. I can picture it. But what about today? I'll deal with today later.
Nice. Julie and then Judy.
I pull the mask over my mouth and nose. Breathe, I remind myself. I need to breathe with my mouth. Sometimes I forget and choke as my nose sucks the plastic guard against my face. I secure my snorkel between my lip and duck walk to the jump platform. Tucking one hand across my chest and the other across my mask, I jump into the crystal clear water. Bubbles rush around my face as I bob back to the surface. Once I give the all clear signal, my dive buddy jumps next. I poke my face in to scan for sharks. I love sharks, but Paul doesn't. He will panic, and I'm not in the mood to slap him back to sensible. I remove my snorkel. It's clear, I say. Ready to see some fish? I guess, he says, panning the horizon. Tap me if you need something, I say, ducking my head back under. I lead us towards the shipwreck. We're surrounded by hundreds of bright sea creatures, and I stop and hang my limbs drifting down into the water as the sea turtle approaches.
Sounds very adventurous. Wow. Lovely. Thank you. Judy.
Mine's also water,
Okay.
but just a pool. She
Okay.
slid underneath the water, an instant numbing. The cicadas, the construction next door, the terror she'd felt that morning, all gone silent. Slow, easy side stroke to start, just to stretch out. Now freestyle. Her breathing becoming synchronized with the stroke. She focused on the cup of her hands to pull the water. She reached.
Nice. Like the repetition. Awesome. We have 5 minutes, so questions, comments, anything at all related to what we talked about today, or just in general how we're building this, or any writing questions at all?
I have a comment.
Sandra.
I think it's a lot harder to show objects, things, than it is actions.
Yeah.
Our homework last night to write about show and tell.
Yeah.
Take an object and show it instead of tell it was really hard.
So what's interesting is there's a lot of ways to go at that. So you could be like, here's my glasses case and, blah, 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 whatever. Or you could talk about like, okay, these are my reading glasses. And so if I wanted to talk about this, I could say how long I resisted getting them because I didn't want to admit that I needed them, and how I always forget to put them in my purse. And, so it's about the reading glasses, but it's not just like it's a round case and it's hard and it's whatever. It's the story behind it. And so when you show versus tell, like when you go to show and tell in school, it's, here's my teddy bear, and that's great, but it's like there's one eye missing and there's like the paw is like loved soft or whatever, and like, but it's from my grandpa and he lives in Kansas, and so that's the kind of thing that I think brings an object to life, the backstory. And so when you see like a kid with a teddy bear in show and tell, maybe it's under their arm, or they're like sucking on the foot or whatever, which kids do. It tells you a lot more than just here's a teddy bear. It's what it means to this child. It's the comfort. Like if you painted that whole picture of like the child clinging to the teddy bear, it explains in a showing way what the teddy bear means to the child, right?
Yeah, I found myself writing more about the stories connected to the object.
Then you're doing it. You're absolutely doing it. Yeah, it's a really good point, Sandra. Anybody else? Questions, comments, anything at all? So we're halfway through. 4-week class goes really fast. So I guess what I'll say is that whatever prompt you didn't do today, see if you want to do it over the next week. We'll meet 2 more times. We do not meet on July 4th, which I'm sure you guys saw in the syllabus, but I just want to remind you. So we meet next week, and then we skip a week, and we have our final class on July 11th. So just make sure that that's on your calendar. And then in the meantime, my next ride-along will be July 7th. So I'll remind you of that next week, but if you're not signed up and you want to come, it would be great. Trying to think if there's anything else. Any other questions, comments, or anything else that I can tell you about before we close for today? No? Okay. Great. Well, it's lovely to see you. Happy writing, and I'll see you next week. Okay? Take care. Bye.
Thank you.
Lynne.